How will the Panthers' new look defense fare in 2024? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council. We're starting again next Friday on the 26th. The weekly Friday mailbag is back here on the show. The way to get the questions in is by either adding me or DMing me on Twitter at Julian Council. So get those questions in next week as training camp begins on the 24th. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We wrap up our breakdown of the Carolina Panthers defense today by talking about the state of the Panthers defense. Over the last couple of weeks, I've talked about Derek Brown. How will he follow up from his Pro Bowl season as a record-setting season in 2024? Talk about Jadeveon Clowney coming back home to Carolina. Will he be able to be a Pro Bowler in his homecoming? Shaq Thompson coming off of a broken leg. How will he bounce back? And will this potentially be Shaq's last year here in Carolina? Also wondering, looking at the secondary, J.C. Horn also has been battling injuries. Will this finally be the year where he stays healthy and shows the NFL just how good he is? Then at safety, what is there really to say at safety? How will the new players coming in, Nick Scott and Jordan Fuller, be able to make an impact in 2024? Talk about all of that over the last couple of weeks here on the show. So please go back and listen and watch those shows if you missed them. But on today's show, let's talk about the state of the Carolina Panthers defense and really how would Ejiro Evero's new look defense fare in 2024. Gone are Brian Burns, Frankie Luvu, Donte Jackson, Jeremy Chinn, Von Bell, Ejiro Evero, and Deshaun Williams. And in are Jadeveon Clowney, DJ Woonem, A'Shawn Robinson, Josey Jewell, Dane Jackson, Jordan Fuller, and Nick Scott. Some of those departures bigger than the others. Brian Burns obviously was the marquee departure this offseason as the Panthers decided to trade him to the Giants, getting back a second-round pick and a couple of fifth-round picks, which Dan Morgan did a pretty good job being able to get some quality players in the draft by flipping some of those picks that he got from that Brian Burns trade. Burns is now in New York getting $30 million a year to be their edge rusher, something the Panthers did not want to pay. Frankie Luvu was given a bigger contract to stay in Carolina. He decided, I'm good. I'm going to go to Washington and work underneath their new head coach, Dan Quinn. Donte Jackson was traded. He was either going to be cut, but the Panthers decided, let's trade him and his sixth-round pick and get back Diontae Johnson and a seventh-round pick. The Panthers got rid of a player they were going to cut anyways, and they got back a top-tier wide receiver and also weren't really losing that much draft compensation as they just swapped a sixth for a seventh. Jeremy Chinn, who was phased out last year, did not fit into the scheme that Ejiro Evero wanted to run. He had talked about this time last year, Jeremy Chinn's going to play us closer to the line of scrimmage. He's going to be more of a playmaker. That was not the case at all. Von Bell, also not much of a scheme fit, came from Cincinnati, went back to Cincinnati this offseason, and Ejiro Evero, who played fairly well last year, someone who we thought this time last year was not a scheme fit, was not going to be able to make the roster, made the roster, played fairly well. Now he's playing for the San Francisco 49ers, which should say a lot. And Deshaun Williams followed Ejiro Evero from Denver, was a starter on defensive line, back into Carolina as he did not play well last year. So again, some of those bigger, like Burns, like Luvu, than the others, like Deshaun Williams. But entering into Jadeveon Clowney, homecoming, had a great year last year in Baltimore. He is now the alpha in that edge rusher group. DJ Woonem played well last year opposite of Danielle Hunter in Minnesota. He's currently battling an injury. We'll see how that impacts him this upcoming season. But that should be the starting tandem at edge rusher once those two are both healthy. A'Shawn Robinson coming in for Deshaun Williams, which I feel like should be an upgrade. Josey Jewell coming in for Frankie Luvu. Dane Jackson, he'll be taking over for Donte Jackson. So still a D-Jack here in Carolina starting at corner. Jordan Fuller should be the starter for Von Bell, while Nick Scott will be a backup. But one of the key questions outside of what we're going to talk about on the show, how will this defense fare in 2024, is how will the replacements fare in 2024? Looking right now at Jadeveon Clowney versus Brian Burns and Josey Jewell versus Frankie Luvu. Last season, Clowney was better than Brian Burns. It's pretty obvious when you look at the numbers, and even if you watch the games, that Jadeveon Clowney had a better season than Brian Burns. Now, Brian Burns talked about watching all the guys in that room, like Shaq Thompson, like JC Horn, getting injured, and that was in the back of his mind. He said he didn't let up, but he also admitted that he was thinking about that, knowing that he was not able to get a contract done with the Panthers prior to the season. He wanted to stay in Carolina. He wanted his money. Now, $30 million a year is a lot for Brian Burns, but that's kind of the going rate for edge rushers of his ilk nowadays. Panthers didn't want to spend that before the season when Scott Fitterer was still the general manager, and he did not have the kind of season that we had come to expect, which led a lot of y'all to be totally fine with Brian Burns going out the door back in March. But looking at ESPN's pass rush win rate in 2023, Jadeveon Clowney ranked 5th among edge rushers, while Brian Burns ranked 11th. Looking at Clowney last season, just at sacks, he had 9.5 sacks as a rotational edge rusher for the Ravens, while Brian Burns had 8 as a primary guy here in Carolina. Looking at their career, Jadeveon Clowney has 52.5 sacks in 126 career games. Brian Burns has 46 in 80 career games. So over their careers, Burns, who's played half as many seasons as Jadeveon Clowney, has been far more healthy and has also been far more prolific at getting after the passer. Now, had Clowney been healthier? Are those numbers better? I imagine so, but still, you look at their sack rate, sack percentage, pressure percentage, Brian Burns hasn't beat there. But overall, you're not really losing that much when you look at the players last season. But when you think about the future, how much longer is Jadeveon Clowney going to play in the NFL? Will he even be in Carolina past this season? If he does not play well, then he's not going to be here. He talked about a couple weeks ago when speaking to the media that he looks at every contract as really just a one-year deal, because you could go back up to the general manager after the season, ask for more money, and the front office could tell you, we're good here. You didn't live up to your end of the deal. We're moving on. So Jadeveon Clowney is here for at least this season. I think the hope for Carolina is that he'll be here next season, and then we'll see what they go from there. But Brian Burns, that was a player in the middle of his prime that you're going to try to keep around for the next 5+ years. And that is not the case. So looking at what they did last year, Clowney clearly is a better player, but in totality and moving forward, was this the best move for the Panthers? To be determined based off of how they're able to go find a true long-term replacement for Brian Burns, who's no longer here in Carolina. One area where they definitely do get an upgrade is when it comes to run defense. Burns wasn't great against the run. His highest PFF run defense grade in his career was a 62.7. Jadeveon Clowney's lowest PFF run grade is a 62.8. So even his worst season against the run, he was better than Brian Burns' best season against the run. We'll see long-term how those guys match up as far as replacing Burns. But this upcoming season, the Panthers could absolutely get the same Jadeveon Clowney they got last year and get the same production they got of Brian Burns last year for much cheaper, and you would see that as a win. But will it be a win for the team come 26 and 27 and 28? We will find out once we get there. Frankie Luvu, though, he feels like someone that's going to be really difficult to replace, and Burns will be difficult to replace as well. Looking at him versus Josey Jewell, Luvu, the past 2 seasons, had 236 combined tackles. Josey Jewell, also the past 2 seasons, has 236 combined tackles in 3 games less played. 3 less games played, mind you. So where will they miss Frankie the most, I think, is getting after the passer. He has 12.5 sacks past 2 seasons, including 5.5 last year. Josey Jewell has 5.5 sacks the past 2 seasons combined, including only 2.5 in 2022 with Ejiro Evero. Looking at Pro Football Focus grades, pass rush grade, last year, Frankie Luvu, an elite 90.1, the best among linebackers in the NFL. Josey Jewell is a 71.3, which is still pretty respectable. In his overall grades, Luvu was a top 10 linebacker, 10th in the NFL, according to PFF, while Josey Jewell was only 40th, according to Pro Football Focus. Jewell, a good player, but they're going to miss out on the pass rushing ability that Frankie Luvu gave them last year and the year prior. And also, man, just ran around with his hair on fire. Josey Jewell, good player, older player. Don't think he is quite the same level as a Frankie Luvu is, even though I don't think it's going to be a tremendous drop off. There's just going to be that one area when it comes to pass rushing where the Panthers are going to miss him. Speaking of pass rush, will the Panthers have a pass rush here in 2024? Like, they're going to have players who obviously are going to be assigned to get after the passer, but will they actually do it? Because they didn't do a great job of doing it last year. Matter of fact, they were the worst team in the NFL at getting after the passer last season. Will that change now that Clowney and Wonnum and a few others are here in Carolina? We'll talk about that and the other two big questions lingering heading into the season with the Panther defense in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. I have three big questions the Panthers defense needs to answer in 2024. I don't think we're going to get to answer these questions once training camp opens next weekend through the course of the preseason. But once the season begins, we'll start to figure out whether these questions will actually be answered with a yes or a no or a maybe. So we'll see how it works out. But the first one I just kind of teased it before we took that quick pause. Will the Panthers have a pass rush this season? Last year, they did not. And they did not even when they had Brian Burns, who was coming off his first double-digit sack season in Carolina, a player who was ascending in the NFL and someone who a lot of teams out there were interested in at the right price. And the right price for him was $30 million a year to play for the New York Giants this season and beyond. But even with Brian Burns, Panthers were dead last in the NFL with 27 sacks. Burns had 8 of those sacks. And this is one of the big reasons I felt like the Panthers didn't have a lot of leverage in this situation with Brian Burns. We saw what they got back trade compensation-wise was not nearly as much as, yes, they could have gotten had they accepted the Rams trade over a year and a half ago, and also not nearly as much as what Brian Burns truly was worth. But when you looked at the fact that the team was going to pay him and that there wasn't really much contract situation they could figure out as far as flexibility, it's going to lead to not getting as much as you truly should have gotten for the player. And that was a failure on the Panthers' part, although I believe Dan Morgan did a good job at what he was able to do with the picks that they got back from New York in the draft and moving forward even to next year in the 2025 NFL draft. But that being said, Brian Burns is going to be a big loss for the Panthers, just knowing that you had someone who was right there in the middle of his prime as an edge rusher who you could assign for the next 5 years, assuming he would have played out that entire contract. Looking at last season, the Panthers were dead last in turnover percentage, which goes into the fact that they didn't get after the passer. If you don't get after the passer, you don't rush an offense and you don't get turnovers. They were dead last in hurry percentage, which can be a little bit misleading. Baltimore, where Clowney played last year, was ahead of Carolina at 3.8%, but led the league in sacks. They were dead last, of course, in sacks, 27, 30th in pressure percentage. Brian Burns, Frankie Luvu, Ejiro Evero, those three who are no longer here in Carolina, had 18 of the team's 27 sacks. A couple other players also only had 1 sack. The returning players of sacks here in Carolina from last year are Derek Brown, who had 2, and Shai Tuttle, who had a half a sack. None of the edge rushers that are back here this season had a sack for the team. You had a guy like Deion Jones who had a sack. He's no longer here. Kamu Grier-Hill, he's no longer here. CJ Henderson even had a sack. He's no longer here. You're missing, let's see, 27 minus 2.5. What is that? 24.5 of the sacks you got last year, and you were the worst team at getting at the passer. So maybe it's not that big of a loss after all when you think about that. And also combine this. Clowney had 9.5 sacks last year. DJ Woonem comes in. He had 8 sacks last season in Minnesota. And Jadeveon Clowney, who said that the Panthers could be getting a great player this past weekend when speaking to the media down in Houston, he had 2 sacks. If you put those together, that's 19.5 sacks and actually more than what Burns, Luvu, and Gross-Matos had last season. So if they can repeat their production, they being Clowney, Woonem, and Chason, they can repeat their production from last year. That makes up what you lose with Burns, Luvu, and Gross-Matos. But it does not make up for the other 9.5 sacks that would be remaining, or I guess 8.5 sacks. That would be, let's see, 19.5, right? Let's see. Okay. 9.5 plus 8, that's 17.5. So 19.5. 19.5 was due 19.8. So 7.5 sacks would be missing there. Where are you going to get that production? And that's still not enough. You need to get way more out of that, out of them, out of the room total. You don't have a linebacker like Luvu who can supplement it, what she did the last 2 seasons, as we talked about with Josey Jewell. I don't think that Shaq Thompson's going to be that for them this season. It comes down to really the development of DJ Johnson, who Ejiro Evero really wanted. The Panthers used one of the picks that they got, actually 2 of the picks they got from the McCaffrey trade to San Francisco to move up with Pittsburgh from 93 to 80 to get DJ Johnson in the draft last year in 2023, and for him to reward them with 0 sacks as he turned 25 years old as a rookie. Now, going to be a second-year player, going to be turning 26 at some point this season. The Panthers are going to need to see it, especially considering that one of them may not be ready to go right away. Going to need DJ Johnson to absolutely step up this season. So will they have a pass rush? I think Clowney is going to have an opportunity, as long as he stays healthy, to get right back to that total 9.5. DJ Woonem, I have my concerns based off of he's not going to have a guy like Danielle Hunter opposite of him, and he's also coming off an injury. And then Jadeveon Clowney has been a bust. So we will see. I'm not going to tell you I'm the most confident right now outside of what Clowney should be able to give the Panthers this season, but will they be better against the run? That's the other question I have heading into the season. Last year, the Panthers ranked 31st in run defense EPA. It's expected points added, and there's only 32 teams. So 31st out of 32 teams. They were 13th in yards per carry allowed, but gave up the 10th most rushing yards in 2023. I do think this is an area the Panthers should be improved. Looking at the Pro Football Focus run defense grades of the 11 projected starters, you could maybe swap one of them out for Troy Hill, but I'm going to have these 11 as projected starters. Derek Brown had an elite 90.0 run defense grade last year. Not concerned about him. A'Shawn Robinson, who's coming in for Deshaun Williams, 60.6. So below average, not great, but better than what Deshaun Williams gave them last year, and he's known to be a run stuffer. Shy Tuttle, 52.8 last season, which was just abysmal for someone who started so many games for the Panthers and played so many snaps at the defensive tackle position. But on the edge, they get better there. Jadeveon Clowney, 72.3, better than what Brian Burns ever gave the Panthers in his career here the last 5 seasons. DJ Woonem, 68.6, pretty average there. Josey Jewell, 79.6, right there on par with Frankie Luvu. Actually better than Frankie Luvu was last year, by the way. Shaq Thompson, last time he was healthy was 2022 rather. He had a 90.3, an elite grade like Derek Brown. J.C. Horn, not afraid of contact, a good tackler there in space on the outside, and when he ever wants to get into the run game, 79.7. Dane Jackson, though, Donte Jackson was always criticized for not being a willing tackler. He turned out to be a willing tackler as he got older, and now it's something he had to dispel, and he certainly did it. Dane Jackson's going to have to dispel that because he had a 28.8 run defense grade last year, and his grades even years prior aren't very good either. That is a concern for the Panthers in the run game with him out there. But your 2 safeties, Jordan Fuller and Xavier Woods, 75.0, 73.7, respectively. I see a lot of guys. Got 2 guys with elite grades in Brown and Thompson. You got a couple other guys like Clowney, Jewell, Horn, Fuller, and Woods with some really solid grades. You got some guys who are average like Woonem and Robinson. And then there's 2 of them that are liabilities in Jackson and in Shy Tuttle. That's kind of the current concern when I look at the interior of the defensive line. Like Derek Brown's going to be good on the defensive line, of course, but like Robinson and Tuttle, Robinson's known to be a run stopper, as I mentioned, but still the grades don't necessarily say that he's the best at it. And if he was, he wouldn't have been a journeyman so far in his career. But he's still an upgrade, I think, from Deshaun Williams last year. Shy Tuttle has progressively gotten worse throughout his career. As I mentioned when talking about the defensive line a couple of weeks ago, he has to be better, because if he's not going to play at a better level, you're going to need guys like Nick Thurman to step in and LeBron Ray to step in and help out. But I do think that this defense is better prepared with Shaq Thompson coming in, with Jadeveon Clowney coming in, to be better against the run than they were last season in 2023. And the final question I have heading into the season about this defense is, are they going to be good enough at corner? Jaycee Horn, as we know, is excellent. As we also know, he's never healthy. If he can be healthy this season, I think he's a Pro Bowl caliber player. Hell, he might be an all-pro caliber player if the rest of the league gets to see him play a full 17-game schedule. Play 15, play 16. You got to play more than what you played so far in your career, JC, for everyone to notice, and also to be able to help your team and to help yourself long-term financially, which is obviously what he wants to do. He also wants to play football because he loves this game. So Jaycee Horn is excellent, but never healthy. Dane Jackson's getting his first real opportunity to be someone that a team is investing in as a starter. Now the investment is not large, but the Panthers are going to give him opportunity. And based off of the moves they made so far this offseason since they brought him in, looking at the draft in the last month where there's been no movement, he's going to get that opportunity. Troy Hill is going to turn 33 next month. He's playing in the slot, that nickel role, and Charles Smith-Wade from Washington State could come in and play a little bit of that. There's just not a lot of depth or experience behind JC and Dane and Troy Hill, and that is concerning. I'll say this too about Dane Jackson. The guy's played in some playoff games. Being in Buffalo, he has not been on a bad team. He has gotten some meaningful snaps against some pretty damn good receivers in the AFC over the last couple of seasons, having to step in when Tre'Davious White went down with injuries, and even just being the third corner in Buffalo. So that experience is something that JC doesn't have, and something that Troy Hill has not experienced in a while. That is valuable. I want to point that out as we look at him and we question whether he truly is ready for that role as the other corner opposite of Jaycee Horn. I do have my concern about Deshaun Jameson and DiCaprio Bootle and everyone else back there at the corner spot and whether they can step up. I think the Panthers should add another corner. They can do it this month, next month, especially when they have roster cutdowns. They're going to have the opportunity to get somebody, and I think they will do it. I still wonder, something happens to JC, are they going to be good enough at corner, or are they just going to get torched this season? That is a concern of mine and a question that needs to be answered. So with all that in mind, what are realistic expectations for the Panthers defense in 2024? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on Game Time actually go down the closer it gets the first pitch. With Carol last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And going on this week, the Midsummer Classic down at Globe Life Field in technically Arlington, Texas. So head down there if you have a chance, if you're in the area, to go check out all the festivities around All-Star Week in Major League Baseball. And when you do, save the 60% off by buying the last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Get a panoramic view with your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. What are realistic expectations for the Panthers defense in 2024? I did a show a couple months ago looking at the Panthers 2023 defense and asking the question, just how good were they really? You look at some numbers like total defense, they were fourth in total defense in the NFL. They're sixth in yards per play allowed, top 10. So this looked like a top 10 defense in certain areas. When you looked at when opponents were in scoring position and just on their drives, Panthers allowed their opponents to score 37% of their drives, which was 22nd in the NFL last season. They were 28th in red zone defense, 29th in scoring defense, and 29th in touchdowns per game allowed. So not great in those areas. And even looking at the advanced metrics, they were 23rd in defensive EPA and 25th in defensive DVOA. This was a bottom third defense when you look deeper. And if you don't look as deep And you also watch the games, like at times they were a top 10 defense. I think they were probably more around 23rd in the league than they were around 4th in the league last season. And it's not helpful either. The fact that the offense couldn't score, they could not keep the ball. Where actually, I think the Panthers had more time of possession last year than their opponents did in 2023. But still, the offense did not help. The defense played as well as it could. And you can't forget this. Shaq Thompson missed 15 games. Jaycee Horn missed 11 games. Marquise Haynes, who was expected to be a big piece for the Panthers with Justin Houston, also there as an edge rusher when he got signed late there in August. He only played 10 games and was never healthy. Ejiro Evero missed 5. Jeremy Chinn missed 5, even though he was not a big part of the team last season in that scheme. CJ Henderson missed 5. Von Bell missed 4. Xavier Woods missed 3. Frankie Luvu, Derek Brown, and Shai Tuttle were the only defensive starters to play in all 17 games. You're not going to have success when you're missing that many guys and players of that quality for that long in the NFL. And I've talked about this when it comes to the offensive line before. Whether the offensive line has the talent or not, if they're not healthy, they don't have the continuity. Like last year, your team's going to be bad. You're going to fail. And we saw that with the offensive line. The hope is the offensive line will be more healthy this year. And of course, with the defense, hope is the defense will be healthy. I do question some of the guys that have come in and replaced some of the guys that have exited and just the overall talent on this defense. There's, of course, Derek Brown. There's Jaycee Horn. There's Shaq. There are talented players. But overall, is the defensive talent there for this unit to maybe take a step into the top half of the NFL defensively this season when looking at more than just total defense and looking a little bit deeper than just the basic stats, if you want to call it that. Looking at pass defense, though, as far as expectations, last year, they're good against the pass. They were 12th in the NFL, according to EPA. They were 7th in net passing yards per attempt, but allowed the 3rd least passing yardage. The Panthers were good, but a big part of that was teams didn't throw the ball because they could run all over the Panthers, and the Panthers were always behind so late in the games. Why would you throw it? And that's a big reason why the sack numbers were down last season. You can't pin your ears back and get after a team if the team is never behind. And that was the problem all year long. The 2 games the Panthers won, the only time they led was with zeros on the clock. So that played a big role. This number will be largely dependent upon the Panthers' ability to, one, stop the run this season. If they can't stop the run, there's not really much reason for teams to pass, even though this has become more of a passing league as we've gone more and more into that being important over the last couple of years, over the last decade. 2, they have to score on offense. If they don't score on offense, then teams are just going to run out the clock by running the football, and they're not going to feel the need to throw the ball in the second half. And it's also going to come down to, number 3, how they replace Donte Jackson and Von Bell. Not too concerned about the Von Bell replacement and Jordan Fuller. I think that should be a pretty good duo there back at safety, at least an average duo by league standards with Jordan Fuller and Xavier Woods. I do have my concerns, though, about Dane Jackson stepping in there. Donte is a solid player. Absolutely. He probably is too. Now moving forward later on in his career, more of a number 3 corner than he is a number 2 corner. I don't know what the role he's going to be expected to play in Pittsburgh is going to be this season, but he's a good veteran player who was finally healthy last season, and that says a lot considering the amount of guys that were not healthy at the cornerback position last year. And the one guy you're depending on to be healthy, who I just don't think you can necessarily depend on to be healthy based off of how things have played out so far for JC in his career. So it's going to come down to their ability to stop the run, the offensive ability to score, and Dane Jackson and Jordan Fuller and how they are able to play there in the secondary this year. I'd expect there to be a drop in production because I do think the offense is going to score more points this year, which is going to yield the opponent to throw the football more. I also have real concerns about the ability for the Panthers to get after the passer. So I think these, as good as JC and the rest of these guys are, if you're out there having to defend for a long time receivers, it's just not going to benefit you. And I have concern about just overall depth in the secondary. So I don't think this is going to be a top 12 unit when it comes to pass defense EPA. I don't think they're going to be top 10 as far as yards per attempt allowed and passing yards allowed total. I do think they're going to be probably more in the 20s, the bottom third in the NFL against the pass this season, just based off of, I don't think they're going to be great at getting at the passer. I think the offense would better put up more points, which is going to make teams throw the ball more. And I just have a lot of concern about just top end talent there at the cornerback position outside of JC. Against the run, Carolina was not good. The first 6 games of the season, 130 yards rushing allowed to each of those teams. They were 31st in run defense according to EPA, which is not a surprising stat to see because you watch the games and that clearly was the case. They were 13th, though, in yards per carry allowed, but gave up the 10th most rushing yards last season. This is an area that absolutely should improve with the return of Shaq Thompson, who I mentioned earlier, 90.3 PFF run defense grade back in 2022, and he was healthy. Was not healthy last year. Really good against the run. Josey Jewell coming in for Frankie Luvu was actually better against the run, according to PFF, than Frankie was last year. That should continue to where he's a solid player for them there. A'Shawn Robinson is an upgrade from Deshaun Williams, and then getting Jadeveon Clowney. I know a lot of people are focused on the sack totals for Clowney. Well, when he talked about getting after the passer is more of technique, where stopping the run's a mentality. And he says, you can go back and look at the tape. Guys haven't really run over me in the NFL. You can't find that. He says the mentality thing, so wanting to stop it, and he's not going to let that happen. So I think Clowney being in there instead of Burns against the run is going to improve the run defense of the Panthers this season, where I think that Whit Brown, like there's still concerns about whether Tuttle's going to really be good enough. There's some younger guys back that are getting an opportunity if Tuttle doesn't play well. I think they get an opportunity anyways, as they're going to rotate defensive linemen, as all teams do at certain points in time. Maybe Derek Brown won't come off the field as much. He didn't come off the field at all last year, really, but it would be nice if he could come off the field a little bit more. But in those certain situations, you're obviously going to want Derek Brown on the field. I think this is a defensive unit against the run that should probably creep up into the top of the third tier, maybe to the middle of the NFL against the runs. We're looking about like between like 15th, like 22nd against the run this year. I still don't think they're going to be great. I think they're going to be better. And this is interesting, is this is the area where this team really used to be great at. There was that long streak of the Panthers did not give a 100-yard rusher, which I don't think it was broken until, God, it was like 2018 or 2019, something like that. It went for a while. And really, since that 19 season, when they switched to the three-man front and had a bunch of older guys out there like Mari Addison and Bruce Irvin and Gerald McCoy came in, and that was last year of Luke Kuechly. This Panthers team has not been good against the run. I don't know if it's going to change this season. I think they'll be improved, but I still think that they're not going to be one of the top half NFL defenses against the run this season, but they'll be better than what they were last year. Overall, it's probably going to be a defense that is going to rank in the bottom 30 NFL again this season. I don't think they're going to be sitting there at all as far as fourth in total defense. I do think that the offense is going to score more points. That's going to yield the other opponent to actually have to throw the ball and have the ball more and try to score more often than they had to do last year. I have my concerns. I don't think it's going to be a good defense. I don't think it's going to be a defense that we're accustomed to seeing. I certainly don't think it's going to be maybe as good a defense as it was at times last year. It's going to be a bottom third defense, in my opinion. I'm not trying to be negative, just looking at what they lost, what they brought in. And this is one of the things that we've talked about. Were you willing to sacrifice your defense for the benefit of the offense and really Bryce Young? And the Panthers, they went out there and they said they were this offseason. They weren't going to pay Brian Burns. They weren't able to get a deal done with Frankie Luvu. They traded for Dante Johnson and got rid of a corner who they decided they were going to move off of, and Dane Jackson, which, made sense. And they moved off of Devon Bell. And we get to the draft, they wanted Xavier Legette. They want to get Jonathan Brooks. They got Trevin Wallace. I don't know how big a role he's really going to play at linebacker this season behind Josey and Shaq. And they went and got Jadeveon Sanders. They were more focused on the offense. Now, Dave Canales talked about you got to get the football right. He's excited to have Ejiro Evero, and it's possible that I'm sitting here and I am undervaluing just how good of a defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero is. I think because Ejiro Evero is a good defensive coordinator, that this is not going to be the worst defense in the league. I don't think that talent-wise they would be the worst defense in the league, but I don't think that talent-wise they're going to be good enough to be a top 10 defense truly, or really even a top 15, 18 defense in the NFL this season. Panthers should score more points. They should also continue to give up a decent amount of points, more high-scoring games, which is far more exciting than a team that can't score at all and a defense that's trying everything they can to hold them down. I don't think they're going to be holding teams down as much as they did last year, and I do think that this is going to be a unit that takes a step back, but potentially could take a step forward moving forward when they find some other guys in the draft and free agency who they think can be more of a long-term player. So look at a lot of the guys, they understand the scheme. There's not going to be much of a learning curve for them coming in here to understand the scheme and all that. And that's a positive, but I still have concerns, just overall talent about this defense heading into 2024. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours, Julian Council. Again, y'all, subscribe and follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council. We're starting again next Friday on the 26th. I'm back here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So either at me or DM me, get those questions into me right not now, but next week, and I'll answer them on the show. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always, and forever keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday.